in, so please do bear with us, but thank you for joining us, and we'll be starting very shortly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. $181. My goodness.
That was what I thought.
Your microphone is unmuted. Your video is stopped. I wonder how
What does that mean?
I don't know. It means I can't get the video. So.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Vivian Eisen, and I am Director of Public Diplomacy at the Embassy of Israel. It is a pleasure to have so many of you joining us to commemorate the plight of 850,000 Jewish refugees from Arab countries and Iran. The Embassy of Israel, alongside the Board of Deputies of British Jews and Harif, are happy to have three extremely interesting speakers in our panel. They will share with us their personal stories as refugees and their insights and opinions on these topics. But first things first, I would like to thank my partners, the Board of Deputies and Harif, and more specifically, Edwin Shuker, who is the driving force behind this event. Thank you also to Lynn Julius from Harif and both teams in the Embassy and the Board. Special thanks to Marie van der Ziel, President of the Board of Deputies, for agreeing to be the moderator this evening. Now, I would like to introduce you to the new Ambassador of Israel to the Court of St. James, Her Excellency Ambassador Tzipi Hotovely. Please, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Vivi. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. I'm very much excited because this panel is including very, very dear friends. I want to mention Dror Yemini, that he was my first editor in Marib. Dror, I'm so happy that this community can experience your wonderful brief about this very important issue. And Rabbi Abadie, that I was fortunate to meet both in Jerusalem and in New York, that now plays a major role in Dubai. When peace is coming, it's a great thing to have you here from Dubai. I think it's very symbolic to have people speaking from London, from Israel, from Dubai at this event. And of course, I would like again to say thank you very much to our host, the Board of Deputies, together with Harif. Marie, you're a great friend, and I'm so happy to see how much your enthusiasm gets people around the new way that we get together by Zoom. But it's still very effective, and you keep the good work. Thank you very much. And Edwin Shuker, again, thank you very much for having this event. I would like to speak why I think it's so important. We gather to remember the plight of almost 1 million Jews from across the Middle East and North Africa. All too often, their plight has been forgotten outside Israel. I think the most important thing about this story, that it's not being told. Here in this country, many times the perspective is, the perception about Israel is that some European colonialists came to the Middle East and they were trying to find a shelter to the Jewish people. Of course, we know that this is historically not right, but many people are not aware of the fact that almost 1 million Jews from Arab countries had to leave their countries, and Israel received them, and they are part of the Israeli ethos. They are part of the building of the State of Israel, and now they're an integral part of Israel's leadership, and they're an integral part of the Israeli story. And I think the importance of bringing this story up is also to fight a very, very strong and very popular Arab lie. And the Arab lie is the Nakba. We just mentioned this week, Kaftet November, the UN resolution, the partition plan, the fact that the Palestinians, the Arab neighbors, had the chance to have again, I think throughout history, I think this is maybe the most shameful moment where they choose to deny the right of the Jewish state to exist. They choose to fight, and then they made up a story that is called the Nakba, as if they were exiled from Israel, and they don't tell the whole story. And I think this connection to the fact that those Jews that were born in Arab states and came to Israel, and they rebuilt their future in Israel, while when we're speaking about this story, most of the people don't know it. So I think it's so important to remember it. It's so important to bring the personal stories behind, like we're going to see in this panel. But it's also important in order to remember that Jews were always part of the Middle East, and we are natives, just as our Arab neighbors. We're not colonialists that came from Europe. This is why I think it's so important also to clear the historic truth. So I would like just to say that I'm really looking forward to hear what our panelists have to say. We also had a very, very important discussion in the British Parliament last week about this issue. And I really hope that very, very soon, every Jew in this community and just in general, people around the world will know this very important chapter in history. Please.
Thank you, Ambassador. Over to Marie. Marie, please.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Tzipi. Thank you, and sorry, Ambassador, and Vivi, thank you very much. I have got some questions which I'm going to now put to the panelists, and after that, if you would like to put any more questions in the chat that I can pick up, I will do so. So I've been notified of some questions. So can I just start off, please? The first question that's come in. What do you think needs to be done to gain greater recognition of Jewish refugees from Arab lands, both within the Jewish world and outside it, in terms of educating about these refugees, legislation to recognize their status, and financial restitution? So Edwin, can I ask you to go first?
Can I give a testimony first, Marie, and we will answer the question after that?
Well, sorry, Edwin, we're not at the board. It's going to have to be fair for everyone, so I'm going to encourage you to give your answer, please, so that everyone can have a say.
Okay, so I am a Jewish refugee. I was born in Baghdad, the capital of Iraq. My ancestors were brought from Jerusalem after the destruction of the first temple as captives to the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. We had an unbroken chain of Jews for 2,600 years, establishing the longest continuous diaspora in the history of mankind. Guided by prophets, they wrote the Talmud, they established the first universities and shaped civilization itself. At the turn of the 20th century, 40% of the population of Baghdad was Jewish. And in the first half of the first century, 150,000 Jews contributed to to the welfare and good governance of the new kingdom of Iraq. Yet, by the time I was born in 1955, the backbone of this glorious community was broken. Little over 3 years after the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, 125,000 people were displaced. They were robbed. They were robbed from their belongings. They were robbed from their dignity, and they were robbed from their heritage. They were allowed the items such as one single watch, one single ring, 4 books, 3 summer dresses, and so on. And these were searched meticulously and sadistically. I was born 1955 and lived 8 years before life changed to its darkest point. 1963, at the age of 8, I was queued with the rest of the community day after day until our turn came. And we were asked to bring our Iraqi ID cards. And it was replaced by this, a yellow ID card exclusively for the Jew. From then on, we were marked, we were targeted, and we were hunted. And new laws come in. It will have a clause that says, except for the Jew, go to clause such and such. Now we were very easily identified in banks, in driving. And so things became increasingly more difficult and more oppressive as we approached the June 1967 war. And after the second Ba'ath military coup in 1968, we were literally hostages in an open prison. January 27th, 1969, we woke up to the sound of the radio announcing there was a public holiday. Today, there are no schools, no work. Enjoy yourself, rejoice. And I remember with my 2 sisters celebrating that day off. It was only an hour later that the announcement came of this, why was this national holiday? The government and the authorities apparently, allegedly arrested aspiring. Guys who confessed, were tried, were sentenced to death, and were executed that very day. Their bodies will be hanged in the public squares of Baghdad and Basra. And the great Iraqi people were asked to go and celebrate under the bodies. Then the names came, 14 names. 10 of them were Jews. One by one, my mother would shriek, we know them all. And we know that they were as innocent as we are and as you are. Their only crime was being Jewish. From then on, life resembled hell. People were being arrested from the streets, tortured to death. People were disappearing, and people were hanging. Jews were now kicked out of public work and private work. Middle-class families were now on the verge of poverty. Our phones were cut off. There were no communication. Universities would refuse entries to Jews. Remember the small humiliations of actually dressing up and going to a social club, only to have a sign saying Jews are no longer welcome. Until 1971, when my father finally decided to take a gamble on the life of his children, his wife and her mom. We decided to escape, try and escape by going to the Kurdish enclave in the north of Iraq. We made it, but many did not. And many paid the heaviest price, their lives. And now they are there in Iraq without access to even their graves or to the cemeteries. Yet, 50 years from that time, I'm still looking for recognition. I'm still looking for the world to recognize our story and to talk about it. And first, I am so grateful for the organizers of this to allow us the opportunity to tell our story and to make sure that it's repeated every 30th of November so that it becomes part and parcel of the Jewish story. Thank you.
Thank you, Edwin. Rabbi Abadie, could I please ask you to give your introductory comments, please, and to tell us your story?
Sure, thank you very much, Your Excellency and my dear friend, Ambassador Tzipi Hotovely, my very dear friends, Edwin Shuker and Dror Yemini, to the panelists and to moderators, thank you very much for this opportunity that I'm being given this evening to tell the story of myself as a refugee, son of refugees. Really, my story begins with the story of my parents in Aleppo, Syria, a community that has been there since the time of King David, over 3,000 years, as the fate of the Jewish community was up and down depending on the ruler at that time. And certainly under the Ottoman Empire, they had good times and they had bad times. But the real bad times that my parents experienced was exactly after Kaftet Ben November, after the 29th day of November, the partition plan at the United Nations in 1947, in which a decision was to partition the land of Israel into a Jewish homeland and into an Arab homeland. Well, the next 3 days, November 30th, December 1st, and December 2nd, were 3 days of rage throughout most of the Arab world, Middle East and North Africa. My parents were the victims of that uprising in Aleppo as it occurred throughout the entire Syria, where Jewish stores were looted, Jewish homes were vandalized, people were killed, were injured, were maimed. And my parents lived exactly next door to the great synagogue, who some historians claim that synagogue goes back to the time of King David, as his minister of war built it and founded it. And so my parents living next door to it saw how the Arab mob violated the fence of the synagogue, the wall of the synagogue, aided, mind you, by the Syrian police to climb over the fence and over the wall, enter into the synagogue, bring the Torah scrolls out, burn them, bring Sidurim, Mahzorim, all kind of religious books, Talitot and Tefillin. Equally, they carried the chief rabbi out of that synagogue and threw him outside. At that moment, my parents decided it's time to escape this country. As they saw the mob starting to climb into their building, knowing that it was a building full of Jewish tenants and Jewish people living there, my parents had to escape from the back door, never to return to that home, leaving everything that they had. They did not even take a suitcase with. My mother escaped to Lebanon together with my father. My father had to go back to Syria because he had a business there to liquidate, which he couldn't. So he was clandestinely escaping back and forth to Lebanon and back to Syria, trying to liquidate his business, until one day, an officer of the government who knew my father well came to his store and told him, "Mr. Abadie, I am being sent to arrest you because you have been crossing the border illegally several times into Lebanon. So I am coming to arrest you tomorrow." My father understood the message of this good-hearted officer. That same night, he took a small suitcase and he jumped on a train. Now, in the train to Lebanon, he also had a friend who was helping him cross to Lebanon several of those times. He told him, "I can only put you in the luggage place," where there, of course, at that time, there were animals and all kind of merchandise. He said, "and they're going to be checking you on the border with Syria and the border with Lebanon. And you have to be very quiet, not even a breath, because if they catch you, it's you and I who will be killed." And so as they arrived that night to the first border of Syria, and that door was being swung open with the flashlight looking, my father was hiding behind some of the cattle and some of the cargo that was there, again, barely breathing. And as the officer tried to go into the wagon, which he would have certainly caught him, the conductor, who knew that my father was there, made a noise outside that distracted that officer, and the officer left. He left him the door open because he told him, before we even get to the Lebanese border, you have to jump as the train is moving and escape for your life, because if you were not caught with the first border, you will be caught in the second border. And that's what my father did. As he jumped into a ravine, thank God he survived, and he made it that morning to see my mother without her knowing that he was coming, as he surprised her, and Syria became a part of their past history. In Lebanon, they lived for like 22 years until 1971. I was born there. Life in Lebanon was not as bad as in Syria. It was under French mandate originally, and therefore more modernized. However, we were considered as refugees. We never received a passport as Lebanese. My parents were refugees, and once a refugee has children, their children become refugees. The grandchildren become refugees for generation upon generation as refugees, sons of refugees. We were not able to leave the country because no country will accept us. Because we were refugees, they will have to give us asylum or being responsible for us. My oldest brother got married and migrated to Mexico with some of my cousins that I had, that they had escaped Syria in the 40s. Until one day we started seeing, after Black September, the battle that took place between Arafat, the PLO, and Jordan. As they lost, Lebanon was forced by the Arab League to accept Arafat and his guerrillas. As they entered into the city of Lebanon and we started seeing them, we knew that Lebanon was going to enter into a civil war. Of course, we went through the 1967 war. I have to say we were frightened because we didn't know what was happening. The only thing we would hear is that Israel was losing and losing and losing. And we thought that after Israel, they're going to come and get us. But thank God that was not the truth or the reality, and we were saved. But after seeing Arafat and his guerrillas in the street, the Jewish community understood it's time to leave, and slowly, slowly the community started leaving. From over 15,000 people, dwindled year by year, year by year. What really pushed our escape from Lebanon, or our leaving Lebanon, was that one day, a photo of my father and the other two rabbis. My father was a rabbi, was a member of the Beit Din of Lebanon, as they were performing a wedding. And so a picture, a very famous picture that has circulated through social media many times, was posted in all the mosques and also in a magazine of Lebanon, with a caption saying, "These are the Zionist agents that are helping Jews and Israel." And when you have that caption in a hostile Arab country, you become a target for assassination. Of course, my father and the other two rabbis had to hide for several weeks until the government reassured them. And from then on, we understood that the faster we leave Lebanon, the better for our life. My mother sent a letter to the government of Mexico pleading for our lives to accept us, and so therefore we could leave Lebanon. It took many years, as a child, many years, 6 years it took for that process to take place. We were finally able to leave Lebanon, of course, without any passport. It was a laissez-passer, and they stamped on it, aller sans retour, meaning leaving without returning. And that's when we left Lebanon to Mexico. That has been the story of over 850,000 Jews, and almost a million Jews from 10 Arab countries and Iran. Many of them escaped for their lives. Many of them did not make it. We were fortunate that my parents made it from Syria safely, and we made it out of Lebanon safely. And here I am back into the region as the senior rabbi of the United Arab Emirates and the Jewish community, living back in a sense that tradition, that culture that we have, in a sense, hoping that that era is behind us and a new era is starting. But it's definitely a story that needs to be recognized, needs to be addressed. There has to be redress on that. There has to be an education to our people, to not just the Sephardic Jews, the Mizrahi Jews, but the entire Jewish people, and also the nations of the world, that they should understand that when we speak of refugees in the Middle East conflict, we are not only speaking about Palestinian Arab refugees, but about Jewish refugees. And that ought not to be forgotten at all. And it's incumbent upon us to make that story known, well known, and that the rights and redress of Jewish refugees should be addressed and certainly dealt with the utmost respect as we do deserve. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Abadie. Could I please ask our third panelist, please, to unmute Dror, Yemini, researcher, journalist, and lecturer. We would all really appreciate if you can tell us your story.
Good evening, Her Excellency Ambassador, Board of Deputies, Rabbi Abadie, Edwin Shuker. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I want to share with you some parts of my research about the issue. I'm not sure that I have a big personal story, because my family actually arrived to Israel more than 100 years ago. So I'm third generation in Israel. But actually my grandmother, when she was young in Yemen, she was forced to leave because of the orphan decree that was in Yemen in that time, which means that every Jew that does not have a father or mother was forced to convert to Islam. Anyway, she left. She arrived to Israel immediately after the First World War. She had no idea that she is a refugee. She never defined herself as a refugee, but she was a refugee. This is the story of her, but what I want to do here and now, in the very limited time that I have, is to zoom out in order to understand the whole phenomena of refugees from that time. Just to remind you, if I'll try to connect my presentation, just to remind us all that in that time, the whole world was built out of empires. And in empires, we had a lot of peoples living together somehow in peace or not in peace. And we have to also remember that many peoples in that time struggled for one thing, which is called self-determination. We cannot understand Zionism without understanding the phenomena of, first, empires collapsed. Second, not only Jews, but many other peoples were looking for their own independence, their own self-determination. And as part of it, I have a problem with my presentation. I'm sorry. I don't know why it's not working as well as it should. Just a minute. Just a minute. I'm sorry. Okay, now I hope it will be better. Anyway, empires collapsed, and the biggest phenomena, as I told you, that self-determination was accepted by the international community. We cannot understand the Balfour Declaration without understanding that many other peoples received the right for self-determination. So it was not only the Balfour Declaration in that time, it was also a letter from the Foreign Ministry of France recognizing the Jewish people right to have a land. It was the 14 points of Woodrow Wilson at the end of the First World War. And as outcome of recognizing the right for self-determination, I'm skipping a lot because we don't have time, a lot of population exchange took place in that time. Turkey, Greece, speaking about almost 2 million people, ethnic Germans at the end of the Second World War, more than 12 million people, Poland, Ukraine, 1.4 millions, and so on and so on. India, Pakistan, 40 million people. And Cyprus, it kept on in the second half of the previous century. It went on also in Armenia, Azerbaijan, that came back to the news lately, and many other places, and of course in the Balkans, in the last Yugoslavia war that created a new wave of refugees. But it's not only something that happened in every conflict, in every falling of empire. It was recognized, the whole idea of population exchange was accepted by the international community. The person that you see here in the picture, for example, Fridtjof Nansen, he received the Nobel Prize for peace because he initiated and conducted the population exchange between Turkey and Greece. The highest international court of that time recognized the idea of population exchange as the best solution for conflicts. Peel Commission that was sent by Britain in 1937 recommended population exchange in Palestine. The Labour Party of Britain, again, recommended population exchange in Palestine. Winston Churchill, at the end of the Second World War, declared in the British Parliament that expulsion is a method which will be the most satisfactory and lasting, so on. I'm not afraid from this new wave of transfers, which means that it was a norm. Even Arab leaders from Palestine in that time understood and even somehow recommended a kind of population exchange between Jews and Arabs. In that time, just to remind you, there were no Palestinians. My parents, who grew up in Palestine, they defined themselves as all the Jews in that time, Palestinians. It is not understood to many people. They do not understand that until 1948, the Jews were the Palestinians. People do not understand it. I know when I give lectures about it in American universities, people just do not understand. What? You were the Palestinians? Yes, we were the Palestinians in that time. The Arabs in Palestine called themselves Arabs, but not Palestinians. It came much, much later. And a lot of other Arab leaders, I will skip because we don't have enough time. Anyway, in that time, just to understand the atmosphere of the not even born Jewish community, the Mufti, Haj Amin al-Husseini, collaborated with Hitler, with the Nazis. He was in all the years of the war in Berlin, and he broadcasted to the Arab countries, kill the Jews wherever you find them. This is God's will. And we heard the stories about what happened in Arab countries. The atmosphere was created in some part because of the Mufti and his lectures to the, and the outcome was that, of course, Jews became the target in many Arab nations. And Abdul Rahman Azam, the Secretary General of the Arab League, he declared this will be a war of extermination of the Jews. And it kept on, it kept on, it kept on. The Arab League decided upon in 1947 that the Jews from Arab countries are going to pay the price if a Jewish state will be established. They did not even wait. The riots, the persecution began before Israel even was declared. And in many places, the only outcome for the Jews was, after the so many massacres that took place in Aden, in Morocco, in Libya, in Syria, the only outcome was that they were forced actually to escape. And the only one place that they could escape was, of course, to Israel. And the riots were already mentioned, so I can skip it in many other places. And some people say that it is all because of Zionism. No, it's a lie. Because actually, when we are speaking about persecutions against Jews, it was much before Zionism. It kept on during Zionism, and it kept on after the establishment, the declaration about the Israel independence. The outcome, generally speaking, was that yes, something like 700 according to the UN official number, 711,000 of Arabs, not Palestinians, became refugees, according to the UN, according to UNRWA. But a bigger number of Jews became refugees because of the same conflict. The meaning is that we are speaking about something that happened in every conflict. So when we are speaking about the Palestinian Nakba, it's always forgotten that there was many Nakbas, endless Nakbas, something like 60 million people from that time became refugees because of the whole phenomena of population exchange and establishing new nation states. Anyway, when Jews arrived to Israel, they lived as refugees for many years. In the 50s, they are not refugees anymore, but in that time, they were refugees. They did not have any UN agency to help them, not UNRWA, not the UNHCR, nothing. But they were refugees. So altogether, we have to, as I told, 60 million people became refugees. Out of them, we have something like 0 refugees today, except one nation, one people, one group of one community, Palestinians. They, out of 711,000, they became 5.5 million people, which is not, they are not refugees, they are the descendants of the original refugees. So how does it impact us today? For example, Robert Fisk, I guess many of you know the name. When he is describing the whole story, he's saying that they have the right, the refugees have the right to send rockets to Israel because they are refugees, because they are looking for their own original land. I once asked him, okay, if we will go with your logic, the meaning is that from every European country, they can launch rockets to another European country because they are also refugees. How comes that you single out the Palestinians and you give them the permission to send rockets to Israel? Of course, he did not answer me. And how comes that the only group of people that is perpetuated as refugees is the Palestinian community? Again, he did not answer. So when we are coming to nowadays, we can see Jeremy Corbyn, for example, speaking about the right of return. That's what he carried just 2 years ago in one of the marches that were organized by anti-Israeli NGOs. And it's go on and on, this kind of propaganda against Israel. And you find out that very prominent professors saying, repeating the lie that the Nakba is one of the great crimes in modern history. And this is what, unfortunately, in British universities, in European universities, in American universities. That's what they teach their students. So the whole idea of the Palestinian Nakba and the whole idea of totally ignoring the Jewish Nakba, it's part of the nowadays
Ben,
academic.
I'm really sorry.
I'm
sorry.
I finished.
Really wants to listen. I'm just worried that people who want to ask questions of all of you won't be able.
Yeah, I finished. So okay. This is what we have right now in the academic level, and for the moment we have to admit we lost the battle. They are winning in the propaganda war against Israel. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for your presentations. Can I please go back to my original question, which I'm going to put to you all, and can I have concise answers, only because I think there's quite a few questions. We've got 255 people on the Zoom tonight, which is great. So lots of questions. What do you think needs to be done to gain greater recognition of Jewish refugees from Arab lands, both within the Jewish world and outside it, in terms of educating about those refugees, legislation to recognize their status, and financial restitution? So Edwin, first, please.
I think we made a lot of good steps in the last decade. I remember 15 years ago, hardly anyone has heard of the story. I think the establishment of the November 30th has been a great step. It was done in 2014. I thank the Israeli embassies and consulates around the world who are making sure that there is an event in their place every single year. We have to treat this subject not as an ethnic, something that we have done it last year, so we don't need to do it. But November 30th, just as we respect and we bow to Yom HaShoah, this has to become our day where these stories are told and shared. I think schools should start putting it in their curriculum, Jewish schools. I think the recent initiative of a Kaddish across the global world, all the United Jews reading Kaddish, the Shabbat before the 30th of November, for those Jews who are buried in Arab cemeteries, which are no longer accessible. All that will help. And then once we know it ourselves, then we can project it to the outside world.
Thank you. And thank you for all giving concise answers so we can get through the questions. Rabbi Abadie, could you answer the question now as well? Thank you.
Sure. Well, of course, education is the most important tool to bring this story or history to light. So, of course, we are decades behind that. But as Edwin has mentioned, in the last 15 years, we have made great strides. First, to educate our own children in our own communities. Secondly, to educate the rest of the world. We have an official resolution at the United States Congress that was passed over 10 years ago. Two of them actually were passed recognizing the Jews from Arab land as refugees. And also we have the laws that were passed in the Knesset in that regard. First, to recognize that Jews from Arab countries are considered refugees. And secondly, to establish the Yom HaPalit or Yom HaPlitim, the Day of Jewish Refugees that we are commemorating now. I think the more we speak about it, the more we discuss it. And I understand also that Ambassador Gilad Erdan, Israel ambassador to the United Nations, just submitted a request to the United Nations to establish also a day to recognize Jewish refugees from Arab countries. So the more we work on it, I think the more the world will know about it. And it's incumbent upon us to do so. It is usually normal and acceptable that a population of victims, the first years or decades, they usually do not want to talk about that period in which they went through. It happened to the survivors of the Holocaust. It happened to the survivors of the Jewish refugees from Arab countries. But now the next generation has woken up to that. And the more we speak about it, the more we have sessions like we have them now, the more people will know about it. And ultimately, that will bring justice.
Thank you, Rabbi Abadie. Ben, thank you. What's your answer?
Well, I'm a bit more pessimistic about the issue. I'll tell you something. Yes, I know about so many activities. I myself published a book. I give a lot of lectures all around, mainly in American universities, but I'm pessimistic. My daughter just finished high school in Israel. And let me tell you, and I asked her, did you learn something about Jewish refugees from Arab countries? And the answer was zero. She doesn't know anything. And it's not only her, she was in a very good school. Even in Israel, they are not educated about the issue. I know that the education minister some years ago, Naftali Bennett, tried to do something, but it did not come to the schools, to the level of schools. And if I say it about Israel, needless to say that in American universities, in British universities, they do not teach about the Jewish Nakba. Everyone knows about the Palestinian Nakba. Nobody knows about the Jewish Nakba. We have to face it. In our circles, we do know about the Jewish Nakba. A lot of work has been done. But generally speaking, about the public awareness globally, we are losing the battle. We have a lot of work to do, and we should keep on in order to change it.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I put another question to you all? We're very, very short on time, so I'm going to start apologizing. We will not get through all of your questions, so apologies. What can be done to preserve the memory and the history of Jewish communities in places where there are no longer communities? For example, there are cemeteries and places of worship in the Arab world that are in danger of disappearing. Should we be lobbying to preserve those shrines? Rabbi Abadie first, please.
Oh, of course. These are either holy places, cemeteries, or synagogues and things like that. They of course, they ought to be preserved. They ought to be respected because they represent, in some places, a 3,000-year-old history that it deserves to be recognized and preserved. We cannot allow the second ethnic cleansing. The first one was of individuals, and then the second one is of the remnant of those individuals or the remnant of that community. If we allow those places not to be preserved or even protected, then that history will be completely erased. And that might be the desire of some of those countries who completely deny even the presence of the Jewish community, let alone compensation for them and whatever they did to them. And so we ought to be indefatigable in preserving those places and demanding that those places be preserved, because that is our history. That is, again, and it's not a history of 100 years or 200 years, a history of thousands of years in some of these communities.
Thank you. Ben?
I know that in some places like Morocco and Egypt, it is possible to preserve some Jewish cemeteries and so on. But in many other places, it's just impossible. The atmosphere, the governments, they do not let it. And we many times speaks about, not us maybe, but about the Jewish power. No, it can be said that we are many times powerless comparing to our world. We are powerless in academia, as I said, we are powerless in that sense. And a lot must be done. Now with the new spirits in our world, maybe new agreements, maybe there will be a change of atmosphere. It will be possible to preserve. for the moment, it's not easy.
Thank you. Edwin?
I'm a great believer in preserving and in convincing and in working even with the Arab governments to make sure that they understand that this is not just heritage, Jewish heritage. This is their own countries. In Iraq alone, there's 6 biblical prophets, and this for them to destroy it is actually to destroy the history of that country and the mosaic that kept it going. So this is my work. My life mission is to go, especially in Iraq, and try and work with the government in saving whatever is left. But we have some fantastic, bright things in Egypt, for example. Only in February, Marie, we went to the relaunch of the magnificent Alexandria Synagogue, where the Egyptian government spent well over $5 million preserving that one synagogue, and they felt the benefits of it. 180 Jews from Egypt came in that Shabbat and brought the word of God and Hashem into that synagogue again. And I think the government is, many more governments now are aware of that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The Canadian Parliament, next question, is the only one outside Israel to enshrine it as a binding law. Last year, someone said Teresa Villiers, my MP, brought the subject to Parliament for the first time. This was obviously in relation to the Knesset designating a day in almost 60 years before the rights of Oriental Jews were recognised in a law. How can we push to enshrine it here in the UK and Europe is the question. How can we raise more awareness? And can I have first Rabbi Abadie, please?
Well, we have, I think Edwin would be more equipped to answer that question, but
Edwin, no problem.
I could tell you that we need to lobby. We need to lobby the governments of Europe and the United Kingdom to do so. And we started doing that, actually.
Right. I'm going to address that question to you, Marie, because the truth is Teresa Villiers and others, Bob Blackman, we only had a meeting last week with the MPs and was chaired by Her Excellency Tzipi, and I think we were addressed by Professor Erwin Kotler, who was the former Justice Minister of Canada. And what we need now is that I believe the Board of Deputies can start that ball rolling. We have the background, we have the MPs that will support us, and now we have to say, Tachlis, now put it into legislation like the Canadians, like the Americans, and let's see. I think we have enough support, but we need that catalyst. I give you a challenge, Marie, for us to do that in the next few months.
Thank you very much. Good to have lots of more challenges for all of us. The next question, which is a related question, why is there a commemoration of Jews from Arab countries and Iran done only recently and not since Israel was created? What's the reason why? I think this one might be one for you, Ben.
Yeah, okay, it's a very good question, and there is a big debate even in Israel about the issue. How comes that we neglected the whole story of the Jewish refugees, of what I call at least the Jewish Nakba? Because for many years, many people just thought that, no, we are not refugees, we are Olim Chadashim, we are not, we came because we are Zionists and so on, which was a myth, which was a big mistake from the very beginning. It took time. It took time, even for the Israeli government, to understand that ignoring the whole story of the expulsion from the Arab countries was a self-defeat to the Israeli side in the conflict. It is understood now. It's a bit late. I have to admit, it's a bit late, because when we go to any library in any university in Britain, in the United States, we will find something like hundreds of publications about the Palestinian Nakba. We will find something which is very close to zero, one publication or two about the Jewish refugees from Arab countries.
Well,
we have to change it, but yes, the Israeli government defeated itself by ignoring.
Could I just ask you, because I've got a few questions on this and we're short of time, and I think you're best placed to answer as you've been speaking. A couple of people have written in why that they find the phrase Jewish Nakba controversial and upsetting, and they just want you to explain why you use that phrase. Why you?
Okay. Because of the Palestinian Nakba. Because what is the story of the Palestinian Nakba? What they argue that Palestinians were forced out from Israel. Well, I have to admit, something like out of the 700,000, about, according to the research, about 30% were forced out during the war, not because of a pre-planned expulsion, but it happened. I cannot ignore the fact that the war created the problem of refugees. So they call it the Palestinian Nakba. Now, we, Jews from Arab countries, we suffered much more. We were expelled from Arab countries. So why not to use the same name, the Arabic name? If they call it Palestinian Nakba, we should call it the Jewish Nakba, just in order to understand. And when we give the facts, when we present the facts, we actually see that we are speaking about a much bigger problem, because Jews in the Arab countries that did not fight against their own countries.
Thank you.
So that's the reason.
For your explanation. Right, I've got time for one more question, which perhaps I can put to Rabbi Abadie first, and then Edwin. The question is, what happened to the many Sifrei Torah and other religious items that were left behind in the communities? What do we know? Where are they?
Well, we know very well where they were in Iraq, as they were discovered in the palace of Saddam Hussein, that were there for decades. We know that in Egypt, for example, there's over 250 Sifrei Torah that are there and cannot leave the country. Although we made a special request from President al-Sisi in person, I made that request almost 2 years ago. And he's willing to give us copies of those Sifrei Torah and all the Jewish documents. In other countries, I could tell you that many of the Sifrei Torah were smuggled out. I know in Lebanon, for example, they were taken out as the civil war was raging, and also as in the early 80s when Israel entered into Lebanon, many of those Sifrei Torah went back with Israel. And in many other countries, either they were taken out, and some of them are being called the patrimony of that country. The irony of that is that many of these Arab countries are demanding to sign MOUs, Memorandum of Understanding, with the United States, declaring that Jewish cultural artifacts, including Sifrei Torah and all other religious things, as cultural artifact of their country. So first, they don't want to recognize that there were Jews there. Secondly, they don't want to recognize that they expelled and persecuted their Jews there. But now they want to recognize that the patrimony of the Jews belong to their country. So we ought to fight that. And if we do find any of those religious artifacts and books, then we ought to demand that they should be returned to the rightful communities wherever they are in the world.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Edwin for his answer, and then I'm sorry, time has flown by so quickly. We could spend all evening talking to you and listening to you. Edwin, could you give your answer?
I personally saw 400 Sifrei Torah in the cellar of the Iraqi museum, and I pleaded with the curator to take 2 or 3 to my community, and her answer was, "Sir, you just don't understand. This is one story with 400 chapters, and I cannot possibly break that and give you 3 of them." And no matter what I said about them being exactly duplication, she would not take that for an answer. There also are, in the National Archives, there are stores and treasures of manuscripts that are now kept in the dark for the last 70 years. And one day, please God, that we will be able to recover them and digitize them and show it to the world.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody. We've had a huge number of people on this presentation tonight, and I'm only sorry that I've got a huge list of questions that I can't put them, but I hope you feel that there was, everyone, a balance of questions. I'd really like to thank the Embassy of Israel and Harif for partnering with the Board of Deputies on this most fascinating event. We are really grateful for our strong working relationship with the Embassy, and we look forward to many more successful engagements in the future. And a special thank you to Her Excellency Ambassador Hotovely for your very warm words of welcome to the community tonight. That was very appreciated. And similarly, as one of our newest deputies, I would like to thank Harif for all their involvement, Lynn Julius, in tonight's event. So thank you very much. I can see Lynn smiling there. Even though online events are a bit easier to put together, of course, it requires a lot of coordination and work behind the scenes. And I always feel that the Jewish community is at its very best when we come together in partnership, working together, and we shine a light on the fascinating tapestry of the whole Jewish experience. And tonight's event has really highlighted the unfortunately lesser known but very important moment in the Jewish story. And it's my hope that all of us who have had powerful testimonies and have learned the plight of Jewish refugees from Arab countries and Iran will support actions to educate about and preserve the memories of those communities. And I'm very proud of the work that the Board of Deputies has done in this area, but it's clear from tonight listening, there still is a lot more to be done. I would like to thank our esteemed panel, Edwin Shuker, Dror, Yemini, and Rabbi Abadie, for your insight, your candor, and the way you answered your questions. Thank you for explaining that to all of us. And pre-pandemic, it would usually be at this point, I would want to wish everybody a very safe journey home, but we're in very strange and challenging times. But this really is a silver lining that we can have increased connectivity through Zoom, so we can at least be able shortly to wave goodnight. And the evening is clearly an example of one of the wonders that can happen in our new virtual world. And I want to wish you and all of your loved ones continued health and happiness. I want to thank you for your participation tonight. There's a lot of us on the Zoom, so I'm going to wave to you as we all say good night. If you can feel free to unmute, it might be a bit chaotic, but good night, everybody.